Hello everyone, my name's Darren. I'm going to talk about constructive development theory, which it's come out of my PhD, and I'm basically looking at how we think. Okay. One thing did you notice in Mark's talk, he didn't use his notes or a laptop or anything. Did you notice that? I'm not that good. So, what I had an idea. So when you look at from a research perspective, I had an abstract theory, which is all we've been talking about all morning, is abstract theories. I needed to get the data. I got quantitative and qualitative feedback. Then we've got the Dewey's fourth step, practical application, and then hopefully what's come out of it is hopefully in about February I'll pass my Viva and I'll get my doctor title. But this is essentially what it comes down to. You don't have to read it if you don't want to. My idea is constructive development. We have these shortcuts in our thinking, and it's our awareness of how we construct these shortcuts and use these shortcuts in relation to each other that is how we construct our thinking in the moment. What I'm going to talk about will link to the first 2 or 3 talks today as well already, because I mentioned it earlier when I was sitting down. For me, in Dewey's system, the very, very first thing up here was perception. That's key, because depending on how you perceive will impact the big bulb here that had all those phases. Now, I'm going to talk. Yeah, hello. Oh, I already checked this with my IP guys at university, and they said in theory it's green because you're protected by copyright already because it's part of the university system. If you want the slides, I'm sure I can give them. If that's the point. You're more than welcome to take pictures, or I can send you the PDF. It doesn't matter. But thank you for that. I completely forgot, even though you told me 2 minutes ago.
That's dynamic intelligence.
That is I have no dynamic intelligence. It's just my it's just my theory. Doesn't mean I can do it. Right. So, and what I've got is that's the constructive element. Dynamic intelligence is that bulb earlier. How many things can you pull in the moment, and are you aware of the things you're pulling in? In order to construct your thinking differently. And then what I had to do was I had to invent something that says, well, he is level 2 and he is level 4. And if you were at the London talk, you'll know that Otto Lasky and Jan de Vish use their CDF, the constructive development. No, it's mine. His was what's CDF stand for? Cognitive Development Framework, where you've got levels 2, 3, 4, 5. But I had an issue with that because who here thinks 4 is better than 2? Yeah,
including Jan.
Including Jan, and 4 is better than 3 is better than 2. So when I presented this a few years ago to my supervisors, they said, you can't do that. We're stage developmental psychologists, but the inherent betterment of 4 over 3 over 2 will get people's backs up. And it does, it really does. So who thinks this is true? We heard earlier about unconscious processing and what goes on in the background while we're not doing it. Is there an unconscious business person? Who wrote that? Who wrote, is there an unconscious scientist, an unconscious student? And at the depths of our psyche, is there an unconscious child? Who thinks that this is potentially true? Yeah? A bloke called Nick Chater in Warwick University says it's not true. There's no such thing as the unconscious mind. A lady called Lisa Feldman Barrett says, we invent emotions. So when you think that you look at my face and can tell me what I'm thinking and feeling based on how my face looks, Feldman Barrett says that's just nonsense, especially when you cross-cultural it. So if I do that to an Indian tribe who's never seen a white bloke before, how are they supposed to know what my face means? Now that's an obvious one, but for you to look at my face now and say, I know what Darren is thinking, Feldman Barrett says that's just nonsense. Chater says, everything you construct is nonsense. There's nothing going on underneath your grey bits. There's no unconscious mind.
So how does the child interpret it?
How does the child interpret it?
The child interprets your dad as angry quite quickly.
Actions usually.
Yeah.
For me, the shouting comes out.
But even just their facial expression, a child will know.
Well, I can't stand and argue Chater's points. But for me, you just hit my next slide. I wanted to know if people construct themselves. How do you construct yourself if you do? Do you do it in the moment? Do you do it over time? Now, where I did steal from Chater and Feldman Barrett is that they say, I construct me now based on how I constructed me before, based on what I think about the context and the environment that I constructed myself in previously. So a gentleman over there asked earlier on, how do we think in context, and is the environment important? Yes, yes. What you were talking about was constructionism. What I'm looking at here as well is constructivism. Constructivism is internal, constructionism is external. So how do we construct ourselves, knowing this, not knowing this, consciously or unconsciously? Do we do any of that? So I figured we did. I figured we did construct ourselves, but I needed to do a PhD to prove it. So I used a program called the Identity Compass, and what it does is it breaks down your thinking into 50 what were called meta programs, but I've reframed them, renamed them as cognitive intentions. I'll probably come on to that. So, for example, when we looked at levels 2, levels 3, levels 4, these two profiles here are two different MBA students. One of them is level 4 thinker, one of them is a level 2 thinker based on Lasky and Keegan's systems. As you look at this intuitively, what do you think is, which one is 2, which one is 4? As you just intuitively see them.
Left is 2, right.
Who agrees with that? Left is 2, right is 4.
That's what it looks like.
He has made a reaction to it.
Oh, well, we're looking at meaning making now.
Oh, tracks.
You didn't see that platform.
No.
Meaning making is essentially what we're doing here, and you're absolutely right. Level 2, yes. Level 4, yes. Absolutely spot on, whoever put their hands up. And the reason for this I figured out, because I've been using this system for about 10 years, the Identity Compass, and I figured once I started to learn Lasky's work and Keegan's work, well, surely we must be able to break down a level 2 person's thinking and thus their behaving, because you know a level 2 person who just automatically reacts, and you know a level 4 person who says, hang on a second, how am I thinking about this? They have outward behaviours, and I'll come to that. So what I decided was, well, it's the difference between these, what I call, these were called originally meta programs. But meta programs come from the field of neuro-linguistic programming. Is anybody familiar?
Yeah.
NLP in academia, it's not liked at all. So if I mean this, if I didn't want my PhD to be thrown out because it was based in NLP, I had to do something different. I had to think about how I can take it away from NLP and turn it into a psychology, because it's a neuroscience PhD. How do I make meta programs neuroscience? So what I thought about was, well, abstract and concrete. Abstract is about the big idea, the pictures, the things that allow you guys to do your systems thinking. Abstract, right? As well as global, as well as skeptic probably, but there's a few of them, okay? And if you notice the difference between abstract and concrete, it's quite large. Whereas here, the difference is quite, well, it's nothing. The point about that is, in the previous picture, that person, whoever this is, that person can only do concrete thinking. Who, where, why, what, and how. They couldn't do your job. They couldn't step out sufficiently to do an abstract thinking. They'll probably make a brilliant project manager, because they'll make sure that things, what are you doing? When are you going to get it done by? And can you show me? Yeah? Especially the skeptic that high, they don't trust themselves, let alone anybody else. Right? So as we start to look at these things, it's like, well, if this person only does concrete thinking, they're limiting their potential to respond in the moment. They can't do abstract. Not they don't do abstract. At that difference, at 30% difference, it's more like they can't do abstract. What does that mean? Especially when you compare it to this person here. It means this. It means that if you can say, if someone's internal and external, internal means I get my rules and I gauge how good I am based on my own ideas. Somebody who's external says, well, can you tell me how good I am, please? You tell me, and are we okay? How's the relationship? Are we good? That's externalized, okay? External thinking, internal thinking. If I'm massively external, I need you to validate me. Well, how does that limit my thinking and my behavior? If I'm massively internal, I'm a bit of a... Can I use the word cock? But that's the point. Now, but you're getting the distinctions. And all I'm saying is that internal and external are shortcuts in our thinking that we've always used. just because we never named them, because obviously there are no systems, just because we've never named them before doesn't mean we don't use them. So what I did was, I aligned them to Piaget and Vygotsky and Brunner and Wadsworth and all these people who said, actually, we use heuristics, we use shortcuts. So what I'm saying is not entirely original, but how I'm looking at your self-awareness, how I'm mapping that to cognitive and state development complexity is new. So this person here now has the choice. Maybe they can use abstract and concrete in context. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Dan, can I ask, what's the difference that makes it not a choice? How different does it have to be to be not a choice?
What a great question. My scale, my thinking quotient scale says, I did two scales. One that mapped to Keegan and Lasky, so in other words, you would come out at level 2, 2.5, 3, whatever. And then my own scale, which says that difference you're talking about, if you go from balance to there, to 30% difference, balance would score a 10 on my new scale. 30% difference would score, let's pretend it's a 6, okay? That shows that on the new thinking quotient scale, that if someone comes out at level 6, or TQ6 I called it, then you know automatically that they are not quite as at choice in their thinking and behaving as somebody who comes out at TQ10. Does that make sense? Also, I say, does that make sense a lot? So, sorry?
External validation.
External validation.
No, let's go a level above that. I'm far too arrogant to care what you think. I'm making sure you get it. Because at the end of it, I gave a talk at the NLP conference, and all I said was NLP is nonsense. And I don't know what the fuss was. But the point was that the audience didn't like it. I didn't really say it that way, but you know what I mean. And the people who came up to me afterwards to say, I gave a talk, it was 90 minutes long to be fair, and the ones that came up and said that was really good, they already had a PhD, so what was their bias? And the ones, what I said was, NLP will develop you to here. There's a whole world of more development that you're not doing. And their feedback was, Darren just did that because he wanted to show you how clever he was. Which proved my point. But, you know, you can't tell them. Study 3, well, let's skip to study 3. So what I did was, how do we think? And I was lucky enough to get 8,000 profiles from the profile owner of the Identity Compass. So I did the student data and I did a 200 student study. The problem was the data was artifactual, in other words, it wasn't significant. I couldn't say the thinking quotient exists, and these things I'm going to talk about in a minute called thinking styles exist, because there just wasn't enough data. So I managed to get 8,200 profiles. If you care about the study, the factor analysis, this is a factor analysis, and these are the dimensions that come out of the factor analysis.
Can you just say culturally who the profiles are?
What a great question. Student-wise, I work in a university in London, and the students were literally from everywhere. Predominantly, you had Chinese and Nigerian, Korean, Japanese, that kind of thing. So loads of different cultures. What was really interesting, this is a side note, what was really interesting was I gave feedback to 3 Nigerian women on the trot, 1, 2, 3, and they each displayed a specific cultural trait that I'd never seen before, and they all 3 did it. Now maybe my questions are getting better and I was teasing out more information, but what I can do with my data now, looking back over time, is I can culturally differentiate using these cognitive intentions how a Nigerian man-woman thinks in comparison to a Chinese man-woman. For example, in the Chinese language, when we talk, the object is the glasses. In the Chinese language, the object is the human. Well, how does that affect their thinking? Because if we're always thinking about the individual, Lasky and Keegan would say that's level 3. So how many of my Chinese students come out above level 3? And all these different ideas come out of the research. And I only learned that this year. I wish I'd learned it 3 years ago, so I could have taken it into account. So, this is a factor analysis, and the 5 factors here explained 47.9% of the variance. Does anybody know what that means? Can you explain it to me when I get to my Viva? Because, yeah, No, it is on 8,000, because I said that, whoever said that, I agree, because I said that, but on 8,200 profiles, it's a lot. It's a real lot. You'd expect like 20% at most, and I got 47%. But what that meant for me was, the thinking quotient score was my dependent variable. So what I said was, what's the difference between somebody who scores 2 to somebody who scores 3, 4, and 5? So that was my TQ score, and that was a dependent variable. So what it did simultaneously, I'm going to show you a graph in a little while. It said these things here are the things that we do. So, and the ones in dimension 3 are the opposites. So seeing, feeling, global, details, future, present. So we're all pretty much good at doing these, we know these. But what keeps us in balance and checked is if we do these ones. I'll show you. So we do these without thinking. But if we do these, we keep ourselves in balance. And the ones, if you remember 5 minutes ago, the ones who cannot do these are lower down on their self-awareness and their capacity to respond in the moment. So on my thinking quotient scale, if you only do these, and maybe some of these, it's all about you. If you only do these, but you are really high on these, then it's all about other. So we can look at it, we can look at this from a role perspective. Who do you think would have a job that is all about the other person? What kind of people do you think would have jobs all about the other person?
Doctor,
Counsellor.
nurse,
We're all there. We're all there, absolutely there. And also the service industry potentially. So if I profile somebody who's a service delivery manager or something like that, it's about the service, and it comes out like that. So for me, what I needed to know was long-term, short-term. That is an opposite. In Piagetian terms, that's called disequilibrium, if anybody's familiar. So what I had then was, I thought, it wasn't just Piaget, there was others as well, but from a disequilibrium perspective, that's how growth occurs, according to the psychology theory. Yeah? Well, this, over 8,000 profiles, I've just linked my entire thesis to an existing psychological theory. I was well happy, I couldn't believe it, right? And it fitted, it worked. In order to be less abstract and more concrete, wherever that is, we need to do the opposite pattern. And it sounds simple. So what I did was, it is simple really, it's just how do we get there? And we'll come to that because we're going to come on to interventions. So this graph, I did this graph coming out of the 8,000 profiles, and I've got the individual thinking quotient levels. Now, if you look at this, it's based on Lasky's CDF, and it's based on Keegan's, what he called his adult development stages. Yeah. So basically, for Keegan, the further up this scale you go, the more developed you are in your thinking. His is predominantly emotional. Lasky's is predominantly cognitive. Put them together, and we have a nice rounded perspective on how people think and feel, or think, feel, or feel, think. So on this side here, if you remember the very, very first dimension, third dimension, if I said that doing these two together creates that disequilibrium for growth, then what we notice is, or what do you notice? At level 2.5, the gap between those two dimensions is great. At the higher levels, the gap between these two dimensions is lower. Well, that suggests to me that the higher up the thinking quotient scale you go, the more at choice you are in your thinking and behaving. But when I got this back, I stopped working for 2 days, 3 days. Because I was just so happy that quantitatively this ticked my PhD box. In essence, I probably could have stopped there and said the theory's sound, but obviously people like more information, more data. and also somebody mentioned qualitative, so I had to do I thought, let's do a qualitative study as well, and we'll get to that. So, if I'm honest with you, what I really wanted to do was I wanted to find, at each different level of the thinking quotient, a different combination of cognitive intentions. Does that make sense? It's fairly straightforward, isn't it? You know? Look, I even lined the colours up. Right? So, in other words, if you guys are all systems thinkers, one, how does that impact your thinking and responding in the moment? Two, how does that limit you? We don't get asked these questions a lot. How does that limit you? Someone says to me, I just know that I'm good at my job. And I say, well, how does that limit you? How can it limit me? I'm great. If that limitation, because all they do is think internally, means that they're about 5.5, what I was thinking was that if this combination of cognitive intentions is level 7, what do I need to do to that person to change his thinking, to map his thinking more along these lines? Does that make sense? So it didn't turn out like that. One of the problems is that I did a massive comparison against existing psychometric tests. I mean, don't even think about MBTI and things like that. They're just nonsense. If you're familiar with MBTI, I came out at INTJ. In my system, you would have 16 boxes here, 16 boxes here. So I will be, in other words, INTJ at TQ5 will be a completely different thinker to INTJ at TQ8. Does that make sense? That kind of stuff is red, but that doesn't matter because I don't think any of you care enough to write it all down. So does that make sense? So if you were to look at MBTI, INTJ here isn't the same as INTJ here. In other words, how can MBTI be useful? Well, it can if they hire me to inject my system into there. Exactly right. Exactly. And I have a paper ready to publish about that.
Fantastic. But sorry, are you saying that your goal is to move people through this? Like, are you trying to get people in theory? I know it's a PhD. You're not.
No, you're.
But like, are you saying?
He's absolutely not trying to sell it at all. Don't worry.
No, as your blue box, like right at the top, it's just like this is the ascendant human being. Like, are you trying to?
Right, I appreciate that question. It does go back to what I said earlier about 8 being better than 7. So it's like,
yeah.
I'm going to move on. Oh, and I'm
Okay.
going to move on from stages.
Yeah, because you don't want everyone the same.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Because at the end of the day, somebody who comes out at level 5 couldn't give a monkey's what I say. They don't care. They're not aware. They're not conscious of their thinking in the moment.
You make them sound,
Read Lasky what he says about level 2 people. It's worse than what I just said. If you get to my age, 35, and you're still level TQ5 or Lasky's level 2, you're probably in prison. That kind of thing. What I've done is, I don't know if I'm preempting this, but I've mapped your level of self-awareness using the constructive development and the thinking quotient as a measure of your dynamic intelligence to stages of complexity. I had to get it moving, and then I moved away from that, but I'm not going to talk about my own theory. That's my own theory, by the way. TQ5 to 10 is mine. Lasky's is obviously 2 to 5. So out of the massive data file, this is dimension 5 on the right hand side. This is the one we all do fairly easily. Yeah, and this is the one that balances us out, if we can, the disequilibrium aspect. But on the right hand side, can you see you've got, this is basically how dynamically intelligent you are. How deep can I go into my cognitive intentions from an awareness perspective, from what's my intention behind each one, and am I aware of that intention? And does that then create a choice in my behavior and my responding in the moment? And the deeper we can go means my responsiveness is equally high. So, for example, I mentioned that person. Do you know someone who automatically responds in a moment? They might react emotionally, angrily, without thought. We all pretty much know these kinds of people. And I don't just mean when they're driving a car, in general. Versus somebody who can say, well, hang on a second. What am I hearing here? How am I listening for it? Not what am I listening for, how am I listening for it? See the difference in the question? What am I listening for? You're presupposing. how am I listening to it? You're questioning the structure of your own thinking, which is the Andalusian baby. So, is it as simple as level 2, 3, level 4, level 5? Not really. Because there are 7 billion people on the planet, going back to my psychometric thing that I got distracted from myself, psychometrics say there are 16 types, there are 10 types, and I've got 100 tests that I looked at, maybe more. There are 7 billion people on this planet. This system allows for an infinite number of combinations of cognitive intentions to accommodate all 7 billion. 50 times 49 times 48 times 47, it's a big number, yeah? So one of the reasons why I don't like the existing systems is because trait theory, based on trait theory. So introvert, extrovert. Who thinks they're an introvert and who thinks they're an extrovert? And who thinks they're an ambivert? And who can care less?
Depends on the situation.
Spot on.
Yeah.
So my question for that is, if we want to embed this in the existing psychology, somebody who says, I'm an introvert, therefore, I ask them, well, can you choose not to be? And can you choose not to be in the moment, in the context? And invariably, they don't know that they can choose. That's the key. They don't know that they can choose not to do it. Yeah? So what I did was, from a theoretical perspective, dynamic intelligence looks like this. This is the kind of so what question. If we link this back to Mark's presentation, dynamic intelligence says, well, if this is now, how well can I predict, span of discretion I stole from Jack's, I'll talk about him in a minute, but how much can I predict is going to happen in a moment? And the further away from now that I can predict this happening, the greater my dynamic intelligence, because I'm pulling in more things, I've got more abstract, I've got more global, I've got more detailed cognitive intentions. Most of the time we're over here and we say, oh, I wish I'd said that back then. I wish I'd said that. Oh, that would have been a really good comeback. So we're all really good at the retrospective analysis of what and how we've done things. Does anybody disagree? And when you look at metacognition, which is thinking about your thinking, we're looking at metacognitive strategies, which now brings in Vygotsky and his zone of zone of proximal development, where you offer a child the solution potentially of a strategy to solve a problem. And what they say in metacognition is that a child will look on it and say, well, the strategy I need is this. And the more strategies you give them, the greater their metacognitive regulation, their metacognitive knowledge, because the more strategies I have, the more things I can solve as a child. Well, actually, having a strategy and picking a strategy is a strategy. So now we're back to the system stuff. Can you have a non-strategy strategy? What I'd like to see is, if we grow the child's thinking to the point where they're able to abstract as a 10-year-old, not as a 40-year-old, right? My boy is 11 and he's phenomenally complex in his thinking. He's brilliant, right? But he's 11. Now I run circles around him, he's rubbish compared to me. For about another 2 years, I'm sure. So what I want to know is there a zone of dynamic development where we help adults and children to think more abstractly, more cognitively complexly in the moment, so that they're not forced to find a strategy that is essentially based on memory from a metacognitive perspective. It's more based on how, and the structure of our thinking, how we think in the moment. How many things can we pull in the moment to influence our decision-making process? Are you okay with that? So Vygotsky had the zone of proximal development, and I invented the zone of dynamic development, and one of my supervisors teaches Vygotsky and he was okay with it. I didn't get a kick in, so I figured that stays in the thesis. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Or if you're familiar with Vygotsky or anything like that? So in psychology, they like to have formula. This is just a quick one. Your dynamic responsiveness, how you respond in the moment, how you respond to me right now, is dependent upon your intention over your awareness. What are you aware of as you sit there? How are you aware? I'm not saying how does your left foot feel right now, because that doesn't mean anything, even though now you're all probably thinking about your left foot, right? How many cognitive intentions are combining right now that you're constructing yourself in this room? Can you choose to construct your thinking now differently? How does this relate to what you guys do all day? Yes, sir.
Why is it over?
Wait a minute. I do know the answer to that one.
You come back to it, don't need
So-
to go on.
Dynamic responsiveness is a function of your intention, of your awareness. In other words, if you know what your intention is, say that's abstract, if you're not aware of your intention, then you're limited in your ability to respond. If you're fully aware, I'm going to come on to this, if you're fully aware of your intention in the moment, and you can choose how you respond in the moment, because you're aware of it, then your response changes. I've got a really good visual for that. I do everything visually. So at the beginning of my research, I had a PowerPoint or a keynote presentation. I put everything in that, and there's a couple of hundred slides now of ideas and visuals. Now, who thinks that? Who's going to now say, Darren, you're a visual learner? Because all the research suggests it's not true, and that's also based on VAK, which is NLP based again. But there's a bloke Pasha in 2009 who did some research on it and said, actually, we do this, but he got over-egged. So how does this relate to what you guys do? If I've misrepresented what you guys do, feel free to tell me. Elliot Jack says that the mental processing is one's ability to take in information, analyse it, reorganise it, if you will, reason it, plan it, change the outcome if necessary. In 1994, Jackson Kaysen established this. So the students are this age, which suggests that they pretty much start here at this stratum here, and what Jax is saying is that over a period of a lifetime, their capacity to grow their thinking in an organisation will be limited to their stratum 5, mode 5. I suspect Jan de Bisch would use this as well. I suspect complexity people will use this, because what Jax is talking about and what Michael Commons and people like that are talking about is in your organisational roles, whether you have your own organisation or you work for GE or HSBC, each role has a complexity setting. The tasks within that role are as complex as they are. And what you do is you get to the point where this person here is operating on a conveyor belt and their thinking is in the moment, in the hour. They don't really necessarily have to stretch their thinking beyond the hour. Yeah? By the time you get up here, you're the CEO of General Electric, and you have to think 25 years down the line and leave a legacy. So Jax is saying, from an organisational perspective, how you think impacts how far you will go in an organisation. So when you start to look at organisations as systems, where do we need to be thinking from a systems perspective? Where do you guys, because I don't know the answer to this, I'm just throwing it out there. Where do you guys think you need to go and start off in order to have the greatest impact from a systems perspective on a large organisation or even a medium-sized organisation? Where would you start? In fact, if I give you the next slide, it kind of gives you an idea. I can tell you the declarative, cumulative, serial and parallel ideas that he had about problem solving, but it does get a bit tedious. So who's heard of Jane Lervinger? She had these ideas. She created a complexity test called the WSCT, the Sentence Completion Test. And what she said was she started the question off for you, and you finished it. And then she gauged how you finished it. In the same kind of way that Lasky does his interview system. What they do is they talk to you for an hour on a question, and then they'll transcribe the interview and circle all the bits that are level 2, 3, 4, 5. And I guess the mean, or the average at least, of all of those, that's your epistemic stance. It's how you think about you in the moment. What people like Jax and Lervinger have said is, depending on how far up the organisation you want to go, will depend on how complexly you think. Does that make sense? So what I've said is, how self-aware are you? How can you respond in the moment differently? How does that relate to one's cognitive complexity? Or does it not relate at all? So do you expect a board member to be level 2, 3, 4, 5? Do you expect the shop floor worker to be level 2, 3, 4, 5? If they're here and they're level 4, what are they going to do? Their complexity is way ahead of their role. They'll quit, they're bored, they'll get out. On the other hand, if you're promoted up here, there's the organisational complexity, there's your complexity, what's going to happen there?
Peter Principle.
Yes.
What?
Peter Principle. You've been promoted beyond to our own level of incompetence.
That's exactly it. So what tends to happen is they burn out and quit. These guys will bore out. Have you heard of Check Malay? They'll bore out because they're bored. The job is just tedious. They'll quit. These guys, on the other hand, can't cope. They're in over their heads, according to Keegan, and they'll quit. So when we look at this, when we look at this from what Mark was saying earlier, do you remember his red thing here that said perception, perceiving, that then went into a bulb, right? Well, you had steps 2, 3, 4. It said asking questions. You had testing it hypothetically as well as mathematically. Depending on your dynamic intelligence, as measured by the thinking quotient, depending on your dynamic intelligence, how you perceive the issue, one will change, because at level 4 of Keegan's stuff, the problem a level 2 person sees isn't a problem, because their limited perception of the problem is the problem, not the problem itself. That was Captain Jack Sparrow. The problem isn't the problem is how you think about the problem. So this bit here, according to Mark's, on Mark's slide, how you then start to test, interpret, examine the problems that you've encountered from a systems perspective will absolutely be impacted by your level of dynamic intelligence. Yes?
So, that's obviously the capability on that side. Have you actually, or has anyone actually looked at the makeup of a big company to see if that is actually representative of
So,
the people in those?
so I hear a nod. So is that the systems side of things that I'm not aware of and not doing? Because all I've got at the moment is I've got 50 profiles of entrepreneurs. And the entrepreneurs range from one-man bands to one woman who sold her business for millions. And her personal wealth was probably around 12 million. Another guy had 8 Toyota forecourts. The woman was worth the most, the bloke was worth the next most. Do you think that lady and that man were 5, 6, 7, 8, or 9 on my scale? Where do you think they came out? They're worth a lot of money. Where do you think they came out? How aware were they of their thinking? How automatic were they in their responding? Were they capable of stepping back and stopping? And things like this. How aware were they? So
6, 7.
most people do come out around here. You're absolutely right. No, they were all down here. Why? Because and I'm going to give it to you in Lasky's and Keegan's terms. At level 2, it's all about me now. How much money can I make for me now, please? More money now, me. That's what that means, right? What they were good at, the Toyota guy especially, was he knew that having 8 forecourts, Toyota is a family business. So what did he hire? Level 3s. Because level 3 is about family, socialised minds, socialised thinking. How are we doing? So I said to him, what car do you drive? He said, I drive a Lexus. I said, but you've got 8 Toyota garages. Yeah, but Lexus is owned by Toyota. But you've got Toyota going here. So what was more important to him was perception of other people's perception of him. He wouldn't drive around in a Yaris. Is a Yaris a Toyota car? Yeah. So he wouldn't drive around in a little Yaris. He wanted to drive around in the top of the range Lexus. So we start to get an idea of how he thinks about things. The lady, who's worth 12 million, came out at 2.4 on my previous scale, the lowest score I've ever seen. And I know a guy called who used to work for her, and anytime, basically had a floor like this, and anytime anybody did anything wrong, she would come out of the office, ring the bell, call them names in front of everybody, and go back into her room. Right? Now, what I got from that, this was before I did my PhD, by the way, what I got from that was my scale works. It's useful because, it depicts what's going on in the room. So I haven't done what you said, and I would love to. I'd love to postdoc. But previously, yes, I've done an entrepreneurial study.
Can I ask a question, Darren?
Yes, sir.
is there a scope, or have you explored the possibility of looking at the kind of people who destroy organisations? Where they work, just to see whether the
That would be
converse.
great, wouldn't it? That would be absolutely great. So I've got that there. There's a lot of text there. I don't expect you to read it, but it basically boils down to the fact that, from my theory, people just don't know. They're unaware of any construction of anything. They don't know that we construct our thinking. They don't know it's even there. Down to someone here saying, look, I recognise that everything is constructed, so now we're looking at systems thinking. Even the system is constructed, and how I think about the system is constructed by me. And if I know that I can construct my thinking about the system, I can construct it differently. So what does that say for personality? We all pretend we have a personality. But if your personality is a construction, could you construct your personality differently in order to be a different person each day, each moment, each time you interact with a different human being?
Each job.
Each job?
No.
Are you a different... Who said no?
No, me.
Who... Are you married? Do you have kids? And all that other stuff, right? All those social nonsense things that we take for granted, right? Are you a different mum to a different CEO? Are you a different street sweeper to a different dad? And all of these other things that we pretend we've got social constructions around.
How your personality plays out would be different in different settings, but I would still have a preference
Right, so...
of what I feel comfortable with and what is me.
Right, can I-
I'm a psychologist, so it's how I represent myself daily will be very.
How does that thinking limit you?
Is that a trick question again?
No, it's not. What I'm saying is that what we do is, I obviously I'm a psychologist, I meet psychologists all the time. And what I say is, can you choose to construct? You've got the facets of structure of change. You know how things work in your brain, potentially. Why can't you change it? And the point is, what you said was, what was the first thing you said? I'm comfortable in that. That's an habituated pattern. You construct yourself now based on how you constructed yourself yesterday. Remember I said this at the beginning, how you construct yourself over time. We do that to maintain stability in our personality and to not get cognitive dissonance. But once you recognise that actually even that is a construct that you construct, you're not choosing to construct it.
Absolutely. But I haven't got time every day in a situation to construct my personality for that. So you rely
That's it. That's exactly it.
Comfortable.
So that's what and in the thesis, that's exactly what I talk about, because I use the existing science to say we construct ourselves lazily based on how we've always constructed ourselves. Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering whether there might be some outlying groups within society.
Oh, tons.
So, for instance, a lot of this may be influenced by the way we're conditioned even in childhood, let alone when we get older. We learn how the rest of society works.
Right.
And some people who don't fit with that, by design or accident, remain outside of that conditioning. And one of those groups might be the guy who succeeds in criminal gangs by betraying and shooting the boss and really got 3 layers in one job.
I don't have any problem with what you just said. How is that any different to the top lawyer backstabbing the CEO, getting a coup, making sure all the people on the board are on his side, and then booting the boss?
Well,
Apart from the dead aspect.
Dead might mean that we're doing society a genuine favour, possibly.
Right, so what we're saying then
I'm
is...
thinking there's something about the lack of necessity to be aware of your own choice.
No argument. What we're talking about, what you've just done for me is beautiful, because this lady and I were talking about constructivism, and what you were talking about there is constructionism and environmental, right? I've got a slide for that. So, what I said earlier was, it's not necessarily, I mean, if it's about stages, then the gentleman at the back there said environment is key. Context is key. How you perceive the system is derived from the environment, from where you are in the environment, how you construct you in the constructed environment. So what actually changes, because from a stage transition perspective, when you look at I've got the psychologists listed here, everything from Ross, Levinson, Commons, Kohlberg, Piaget, Vygotsky, all these other people, right? None of them tell you what to change to go up a level. None of them. And you think we're 50 years down the line since some of these people wrote their stuff. Why can't you tell me, as a stage development psychologist, what to change so that my thinking can grow. Yes, you can ask me an abstract question, but what's going on in my brain? As a psychologist, what's changing? What I noticed was that people's intention and awareness of that intention. If I think about abstract and I become differently aware because all of a sudden something clicks and it changes, what's changed? Well, what's changed is my awareness of abstract and the intention behind it. I'm aware the intention has changed, so I then have a different choice. Whereas previously I could only go that way because of abstract, now I've understood differently what abstract means from an intention perspective. I can now go that way, those ways. So for me, transition is the it's not for me. Transition is the incremental movement between stages, and it's explained in various ways, like model of hierarchical complexity, Michael Commons, who says that at each level of the organisation you've got a task, and that task is a set, I mentioned, set complexity level, and each task within that task has a set complexity. So you have a fractal way of breaking down these tasks. It's too much for my tiny brain, right? All we're doing is we're creating these shortcuts and we're naming them. As somebody else said it earlier, we're just giving things names. But we're all talking about the same thing potentially, and we just got a different name for it. And I've got a slide for that as well.
Darren?
Thank you, sir. So what changes is the intention and the awareness of whatever you're doing in a moment. When Mark said something and you got it, your intention behind what you understood previously changed. Your awareness of that intention changed. Now it depends on whether you understood the intention change or the awareness change. However you look at it, one of those two things changed. So for me, how do we change our thinking in the moment? Well, if you remember back to the very first slides, options, procedures, future, present. I could have put them in order, couldn't I? Yeah. Abstract, concrete. That one's okay. What we do is we go back to the disequilibrium idea and say, well, actually, because I don't do very much future, I don't plan. I don't think about the future. I only think about now and tomorrow, right? What we need to do is start doing more of it. And that's just the opposite pattern. Disequilibrium. Because it's the once we get balance between future and present, or polar and consensus, that gives us the choice. If we look at it from a choice perspective, there aren't necessarily any stages. My own PhD process, this is my theory mapped out to my own PhD process, okay?
Yeah.
I am massively options, and I talked with a colleague here today earlier who's also options oriented, and what was said was, this is how I think. And when I pointed out that actually the options pattern keeps you doing this, it makes sense. So I am massively options. Well, that's not good. When you write a chapter and that paragraph there should be here, but it's here, it flows in my mind. But when somebody who's more procedural or somebody who's good at academic writing reads it, it doesn't flow for them. You okay with that? Make sense? So I had to write stuff down and get someone else to read it. I was very abstract. I had to start doing who, where, why, when, what. Because you've got to write from a psychology perspective. Who said what? When did they say it? What did it mean? I've lots of ideas. Not really good at doing things. Ask my wife. Difference and sameness. I'm always looking for. Now we pretty much filter for difference anyway. So how is this different to what I've done before? And then how is it same? But can I choose those? Global details. So what my slide is saying is options, procedures. There are no stages. Instead, we focus on that heuristic that we need in the moment. And by virtue of this focus here, we then have the capacity to choose between options and procedures. So when it comes to using it again, I don't have to relearn it, I just have to revisit it. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. My supervisor thinks I should get that tattooed on my arm once I'm finished.
Cool.
So, anybody got any questions, or you're all right with that?
Please don't get the tattoo.
Yeah. There are no unique stages. As far as I'm concerned, from a constructed development process, how you construct yourself isn't necessarily a stage development. And so far, we move away from Lasky and Keegan and all these others. Each growth ring there was an intention. So, what came out of my thesis was dynamic intelligence is a measure of one's constructed development. And the 4 pillars of constructed development are intention, awareness, choice, and response. And to put that into context, and to tie in what we've been saying, or what I've been saying so far, is now somebody who is massively unaware and they just react emotionally, they just react in the moment. They're not conscious of their intention. They're definitely not conscious of any awareness. They don't know that they've got a choice, and they don't respond with either consciousness or unconsciousness. They just respond. So who knows somebody like that, even if it's not necessarily as steep and horrible as that, compared to
Donald Trump.
Well,
You nearly got rid of it.
no one's mentioned Trump or Brexit yet. Well done. Right? But the point here is, now, who do you know? And I don't think any of us know, because even though it's my theory, I don't do this. I'm not that bloody good. So, am I aware? Am I conscious of my intention? Conscious of my awareness? Conscious of the choices that consciousness creates? And therefore, I can choose how I respond in the moment. No one's come out of 10 so far. Right? What's great about this image is that somebody who doesn't know their intention behind their thinking and behind their construction, they might be aware of how they're thinking, and therefore they might have a choice on how they think, and therefore they might be able to respond with conscious choices. But the greatest they will get to is 7.3 on my new scale, because they start from an unconscious perspective here. So the point for development for anybody is their last point of unconsciousness. Yeah?
Darren, is that saying we could get the woman who was at 2.4 up there at all? How do you, because it sounds like it's unlimited, but to me, I'm not a psychologist, I try and push people in directions and think they're never going to get there. So what are we limited by?
So what I really like about your question is, you're asking, how do I get, what you're saying is, right, and I'm making this up, so forgive me, because we know we can't read minds, I mentioned at the very beginning. I'm level 4, you're level 2, you're never going to get it, what's the point? So how do I get you from 2 to where I'm thinking? At that point you say, there's no point. If they're level 3 or leaving 3, then you can start to develop their thinking. But at level 2, I wouldn't even talk to them.
Because they're so closed.
Because they're so close.
So
Now, at level 2, okay, the actual answer is level 2 people need therapy, level 3 people need, level 3 people need coaching, and level 4 people need developmental mentoring. So level 2 people need therapy, level 3 people need coaching, and level 4 people need developmental mentoring. Because it's more of a relationship than a help. So you're not, one of the things I said at the NLP talk was that we should have a minimum standard of coaches, because you can't just do the whole weekend course and call yourself a coach, you know? Because what if you're level 2? You can't actually see the patterns of a level 4 person. You know, if you're down here on my scale, you can't see the unconscious awareness that this person has. How can you coach them? Does that make sense? So, that is pretty much the theory in a nutshell. Yes, sir?
So can you just explain a bit more what you mean by intention?
For me, behind every cognitive intention, and this is where I use the words again, is I have a way of constructing myself, and the reason I construct myself is pretty much, we'll say, unconscious, despite what Chaitin will say. So I have an intention behind the use of internal, and that intention might be because I think I'm great, or I know I'm great, or something tells me I'm great, but it's here, it's not there. If I'm aware of that, I can temper my responses, because my intention is to say, I get my rules from me. I don't need you for my rules. So my intention is to, what? I mean, we could make something up here. Safety? I don't know. But if you're aware of why and how you think, the structure of your thinking in the moment, that unconscious intention that drives your thinking starts here. So as you asked that question, what was your intention?
To better understand what you meant.
Right, so you asked the question to say, what are you talking about, Darren? My intention then is to say, I don't know. No, it's not. It's to say, there are 50 cognitive intentions, and each one is a shortcut to how we think. Internal, external, abstract, concrete, that kind of thing. So there is, from an abstract perspective, no, let's go with concrete. From a concrete perspective, my intention is to know who, where, why, when, and how. If I know that that's my intention, it doesn't mean you guys call it concrete, that's just my made up word, right? doesn't mean that you're going to do that. So on this slide, I'm going to go back to the other slide. On this slide here, I've called these 50 things specific names because they represent something and mean something to me. What I'm saying here is, if you know from a systems perspective that there are other facets to someone's self-awareness, and you tell me that actually I like this and I like this, if we can measure that self-awareness, that's still a measure of someone's dynamic intelligence. How aware they are of self in the moment is then still their dynamic intelligence. Okay? What we were talking about earlier was constructivism is how I construct myself, constructionism is how we construct the external environment and whether we live up to it. So for example, I asked some students recently, you're from Nigeria, can you step out of your culture so that it doesn't impact your thinking? How many said they could?
0.
But once I got them aware of the fact that they constructed their thinking based on their cultural impact, that changes. So next year, if I ask them again, they might say yes. And that's all I'm doing is I'm bridging my theory. Constructive development theory is a bridge between constructionism and constructivism. Okay, final slide. Hopefully that's coming out next year. Okay. The final line of my thesis says, if this turns out to be true, then there's no reason why you couldn't become a constructive developmental psychologist. Simple as that. Who recognises Descartes, is it? Where he said, I can't even bloody think.
Yeah.
Cogito ergo sum.
Yeah.
So I've improved on that. Where I said, cogitandi mea, my thinking has intention, therefore I am. That kind of thing. Anybody got any questions? Or anything like that? Yes, sir.
Emotion.
I side with Feldman Barrett and think that emotions are constructed, and I also think that if you allow emotion to regulate your responses, you're a limited thinker, which is what Keegan and Lasky also say. So somebody who responds automatically at low levels, somebody who consciously feels empathy is limited to level 3 socialized mind thinking. In order to be a high level thinker, you need to move through emotion into cognition. I didn't make that up, I'm sure I stole that from somewhere else. But in order to be a high level thinker, you need to move through level 3, emotion, into cognition. So if you recognise that you're emoting in the moment and it's limiting your potential, your capacity to respond, you're halfway there.
So my analogy is when I'm driving, I'm a level 2 plus 3 thinker.
See
And I
that?
reflect on it afterwards and maybe I shouldn't have done that.
See, that's perfect, because now we've got the context on one of my slides and also that slidey bar thing where you said, I wish, span of discussion. Yes, sir, someone else had a hand up.
Well, you asked before about what's the intention behind asking a question, and it struck me how often in meetings you get the kind of conscious awareness, which is I want to find out more information, but there's also some unconscious thing going on, which is I want to look clever, I want to make you look stupid, I want to make some sort of political point, whatever. I'm sure this wasn't the intention you slide with all the red and the green, but the sort of the binariness of it, are they always sort of mixed together in a complex manner in the situation?
I think so, and I also think that if we go back to that slide, that at these levels up here, there is no real unconscious. That should all be green, for example. I've got another slide like this, but the binary is for simplicity, because down here, in reality, that's all red, that's all green. To answer your question, yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So, and also you could even do a similar thing up here where that's this big rather than that big, and that's smaller, because your awareness is greater than your unawareness.
Mm.
So I like that, but I didn't put it in here because you're right, it was just the binary stuff. Any other thoughts? I have no problem with you saying, Darren, this is all nonsense. Because it is all made up. It's all based on what I've been doing for the past 10 years. But it's all made up. But it's no more made up than trait theory when you look at the people who invented traits. You know, they just did a fact analysis of what all their traits were and asked their friends what it meant. Allport, people like that. It's true, absolutely true. So when you say you are an introvert or an extrovert, it's not real. Ocean isn't real. Openness, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism. You know, because I asked a guy, you do neuroticism, can you tell me how you do neuroticism and I'll do it your way, and I can be neurotic too? And he couldn't tell me, but he's an expert on ocean. So they don't get, in ocean, and I've got a paper on this, ocean doesn't give you choice. How can I choose to be a neurotic?
Good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.